Good afternoon and thank you for watching today. I'd like to set out, if I may, the economic measures that the Welsh Government is taking to help businesses through the 2-week fire break that the First Minister announced just yesterday. Now, the measures that I will set out today demonstrate our determination to stand with working people and with businesses as we collectively attempt to bring coronavirus under control and give our economy the best chance of coming through this crisis. The 2-week fire break will begin this Friday, October 23rd, and will end on Monday, November the 9th. And it means that from 6 p.m. on Friday, people must stay at home, except for very limited purposes such as exercise, that people must work from home whenever possible, that people must not visit other households or meet other people they do not live with, either indoors or outdoors, other than in exceptional circumstances. No gatherings will be allowed outdoors, and all non-food retail, hospitality businesses, close contact services and events and tourism businesses such as hotels will close. As it has done throughout this crisis, the Welsh Government is working tirelessly to support our economy through this crisis and to protect jobs. And I'm proud of what we have done so far. Businesses and workers have the most generous offer of help anywhere in the United Kingdom, here in Wales. Our Economic Resilience Fund this week increased from 500 million to over 630 million pounds, has already helped to protect more than 100,000 jobs, with more to be secured. The Development Bank of Wales has made as many COVID loans to businesses as all of the UK government-backed COVID loans that have been offered through every single high street bank. We've given more than £760 million in grant support to 64,000 firms through the business rate system, and we've supported startups, 1,600 of them. We've protected businesses from eviction by extending the moratorium until the end of this year, and we set aside an extra £40 million for our COVID commitment so that everybody has access to the advice that they need to find training, a job, or help to start their own business. But the virus has not gone away. And if we do not act now with a 2-week fire break, there is a very real risk that our NHS will be overwhelmed and that we could see even larger numbers of people dying because of coronavirus this winter. This cannot be allowed to happen. Doing nothing is simply not an option. The fire break is an absolute necessity. And through the fire break, businesses will be supported with a combination of UK government and Welsh Government support. Businesses should be able to receive job retention scheme support for eligible employees for the period between the 23rd and 31st of October, and then the new enhanced job support scheme from November the 1st. Now, I do realise that having to access two different forms of support is far from ideal, and that some businesses will struggle to take full advantage at this late stage of the job retention scheme. And as the First Minister explained yesterday, we pressed the Chancellor to bring forward the new job support scheme to ensure that all those working for businesses which are forced to close would receive financial support for all employees and would not have to access two schemes during this fire break. We even offered to make up the difference between funding for each employee under the job retention scheme and the job support scheme. But the UK government has so far refused this offer. We are continuing to press the Treasury to do all they can to ensure employees and employers in Wales will benefit from UK government support during the fire break to the maximum possible extent. But of course, we recognise that businesses need the extra support of Welsh Government too. And that's why we've taken the decision to more than double the third phase of the Economic Resilience Fund by injecting an additional £150 million of new money into this fund. This means that there will now be nearly £300 million of Welsh Government funding available to support businesses affected by the 2-week fire break. Grants of £1,000 will be available to businesses eligible for small business rates relief and occupying a property with a rateable value of under £12,000, whether or not they are required to close. This has already been acknowledged as a good offer and recognises the acute challenge that our small businesses are facing right across Wales. Grants of £5,000 will be available to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses required to close during the firebreak and occupying a property with a rateable value of between £12,001 and £50,000. Businesses will be automatically eligible for these elements and only need to update their information and bank details via Business Wales or their local authority. In addition, discretionary funds of £2,000 will be made available on an application basis for businesses closed or materially affected by the firebreak. And a further discretionary £1,000 grant will be made available to businesses on the same basis where they are materially affected by local lockdown measures for 21 days or more prior to the start of the firebreak. I'm pleased to say a further £20 million is also being put into business grants, and we'll remove the co-funding requirement for businesses required to close during the firebreak lockdown period. This means £100 million in business grants will be available for businesses of all sizes. And those who are self-employed will be able to continue to access the UK government's extended self-employment income support scheme. However, for some, that support may not be enough. So I'm pleased to say that they'll also be eligible to apply for the local authority discretionary grant funding, which will be operated by councils across Wales. Now, as during earlier periods of support through our Economic Resilience Fund, small businesses applying for business grants will be asked to sign up to the principles of the Welsh Government's economic contract, ensuring that despite the crisis, we continue to work together in taking on the longer-term challenges such as decarbonisation, the need to improve fair work practices, and develop people with higher skills. Medium-sized and larger businesses receiving a grant will be expected to sign a full economic contract. Now, I'd encourage every firm to visit the Business Wales website for more information or to contact the Business Wales helpline. Countless businesses have told me in recent weeks how important the pre-Christmas period is to their trade. And we hope that through this 2-week, short, sharp firebreak, we can give them a clear run at that vitally important economic opportunity. And in regard to public transport, and to underscore the stay-at-home message, over this firebreak, we've asked Transport for Wales and bus operators to reduce services, particularly outside of peak hours. This is a complex task, and I appreciate the efforts of all of those working in our transport sector and who are introducing these short-term measures. Services will be similar to those in August and will be achieved through cancellations and changes to timetabled services. And it's imperative that remaining capacity is safeguarded for key workers and for essential journeys. Those who must use public transport should read advice very carefully and check directly with operators before travelling. Buses and trains used by pupils to access schools and those that cross the border to England, where current restrictions are different, will be protected. Now, I'd like to end by acknowledging very clearly that I recognise businesses in Wales face a very difficult time over the next few weeks. I hope, though, that what we are announcing today will offer our businesses, our workers, the people of Wales, the security of knowing that the Welsh Government has your back as we enter this necessary period of action to control the virus and save the NHS. Of course, this is a well-being crisis too, with emotional and mental resilience wearing thin, which only makes the need for us to stand together all the more important. Just as we did from March onward, we must unite again in common cause to support the NHS, to save lives and to protect livelihoods. And I'll now move to questions, beginning today with James Williams from BBC Wales. James.
Thank you very much, Minister. From a wage support point of view, this firebreak period, as you've alluded to, covers 2 support packages, the furlough scheme, which ends on the 31st of October, and then the new job support scheme. The problem is that some people won't be able to be furloughed for that last week or so. How many people are going to fall through the cracks here in Wales? Do you know that figure? The Treasury told you, which we are told last week, that they weren't going to bring the job support scheme forward. So why don't you have a contingency in place for those people already? And what are you going to do now, looking forward, to make sure that those people don't miss out on a week or so's wages?
Well, thank you, James. First of all, for viewers watching this today, there are two different intervention rates for the job retention scheme and the job support scheme. Currently, the job retention scheme is offering support to the extent of about 60%. The job support scheme is more generous, 67%. We as a Welsh Government said to the Treasury that we were willing to make up the difference to provide enhanced support for people during this firebreak. That means that we would have spent a significant sum of money, something in the order of £11 million, topping up the wages of people affected during this period. So far, the Treasury has not responded in a way that we would wish them to. However, I can say that the First Minister has today written again to the Chancellor with another practical solution. Now, it's important to say that we do not have control over tax records. This is an HMRC administrative issue. It's a reserved matter. We need the UK government to step up and provide the wage subsidy scheme for every single worker who needs it. We expect them to do so, and as I've said, we are willing and ready to provide additional financial support to make sure that that scheme is enhanced for everybody affected.
Sorry, do you know the number of people who will be caught by this? Didn't get an answer to that point.
Unfortunately, James, unfortunately, James, all of the data is contained within the HMRC. They cannot share the data with us, and so the HMRC, the Treasury, would have that figure to hand, but they do not provide that data set to us.
Okay, I want to talk about non-essential retail. The scientific paper from the technical advisory cell that says that closing non-essential retail basically has very little impact on the RT value. Could you just explain then why they've been ordered to close as well?
Well, there are many parts of the economy. There are many activities which, if stopped, if closed, only contribute a small amount to reducing that R number. But in total, in aggregate, it makes a significant difference. And if we open gaps in terms of what sectors should be allowed to open, in terms of what activities should be allowed to be permitted, steadily you decrease the impact of the firebreak. We wish this to be a short, sharp shock to make sure that it's just a contained 2-week period that gives society and businesses the best possible prospect of them making it through with certainty to the end of the year, particularly through that crucial Christmas period. And I'm sure, James, that most people in retail would wish to have a short 2-week period of closure if, in exchange, they get a lengthier period of certainty. Contrast that with what's happening elsewhere in the UK and further afield, where much lengthier measures are being introduced. This will give retail operators the best possibility of having a buoyant Christmas period. And we'll move on now to Adrian Masters from ITV Wales.
Thank you, Minister. And I'd like to go back to the difference of opinion that you referred to with the Treasury, the UK Treasury. The Treasury has said that there is no gap between the schemes. I'm sure you've read the quotes from the Treasury source saying that there's no gaps. It's not about the cost, that the new scheme is available to as many people as the original scheme. Do you agree that there is no gap? And if that's the case, are you making this point for political purposes?
Not at all, Adrian. There may be no time gap between the first scheme and the second scheme, but in terms of the generosity of the two schemes, there is most certainly a gap. And as we've heard Andy Burnham repeatedly argue in Greater Manchester, the job retention scheme, currently operating with an intervention of 60%, is insufficient for workers there. He's called for an 80% intervention rate. The job support scheme is offering 67%. And in order to bring that 60% to 67%, we were willing to pay UK government to do so here in Wales. But there is also an administrative issue here. We would wish businesses to avoid having to apply for two different schemes during the firebreak period, and that's why we asked the Treasury to bring forward the job support scheme so that businesses would only have to apply once and that their employees would benefit from a more generous provision. As I said, the First Minister has written today, again, with a very practical solution to this challenge, and I don't think it's beyond the imagination, the creativity, the wisdom, or the wit of UK Treasury to be able to resolve what appears to be a very simple administrative issue.
And if you've set aside that money, why not use it anyway to top up the scheme? Because you can, I realise you have other grants, but why not set aside that and say, okay, this is the Welsh Government's job retention scheme.
And that's a very reasonable question to ask. A number of people are asking us this, and it's for one simple reason. We don't have access to HMRC systems. We do not have access to people's tax records. We do not have the ability to be able to pay people directly. And even if we did, this is a UK government responsibility. We are willing to pay for the enhanced scheme for all workers that will be affected during the firebreak. All we are asking the UK government to do is to administer it for us.
But if a business, I'm sorry, this is part of the same question, I promise. If a business were in receipt of the Treasury scheme, they could prove that to you and you could give them the top up as a part of a separate scheme.
Well, we're still working through solutions. Our ideal solution, though, would be for just one scheme to operate rather than two. We have multiple challenges with this. One, the difference in the amount of support that workers ultimately get, whether it's 60% or 67%. Then also the requirement for businesses to apply for two separate schemes. We really think that during this period of difficulty for businesses, it would surely be better just to have one scheme in place for them to apply through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And I'm going to move on to Mike now. Mike Hughes from LBC. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon. I do think I've jumped the queue here, but I'll crack on.
Yes.
The truth is, though, Minister, that there are going to be winners and losers in this shutdown, isn't there? Those who operate purely within the realms of online, the likes of Amazon, will be allowed to continue to operate within this shutdown, while those who have a shop premises, for instance, on a high street cannot. And there's also, you've talked about trying to support businesses in the run-up to Christmas, but there are those who are far more seasonal earlier in the year. We've spoken to one business that does 40% of their yearly turnover between now and the 31st of October. There's a pumpkin grower in Cardiff that we've spoken to today that will have to throw out a large proportion of his crop to sheep because he won't be able to sell it in the run-up to Halloween. There is the risk here, isn't there, that some seasonal businesses in the run-up to Christmas could well be decimated by this lockdown.
And this is not just confined to Wales. This is something that's affecting economies worldwide. The difference, of course, is that here in Wales, we have the most generous package of support for businesses and working people anywhere in the United Kingdom. And let's just contrast for one moment what's happening, it appears, in Greater Manchester. And I stand shoulder to shoulder with Andy Burnham in calling on the UK government to make more money available for businesses and working people in Greater Manchester and across the UK. Because according to reports this morning, £20 million is going to be made available to Greater Manchester, amounting to what, £8 per person? Our Economic Resilience Fund for just 2 weeks amounts to £300 million, £100 per person. That demonstrates the extent to which the Welsh Government is intervening to support workers, to support businesses, to make sure that we've got a strong economy once we recover from coronavirus. But I do recognise, Mike, that there are challenges that many businesses are facing, and that's why, as part of the third phase of the Economic Resilience Fund, we have that crucial element of business grants that will help businesses develop for the future to overcome the sort of issues that you've identified with, the challenge of online retail versus in-person physical retail. We're also going to be investing very heavily indeed in town centres with our town centre first approach so that we can support retail as well as hospitality in towns and on high streets as well. But I recognise this is an incredibly difficult period for businesses across multiple sectors. Some sectors have been hit far worse, but this is a virus. This is a pandemic that has hit every sector in some shape or form.
At the weekend, retail groups were urging people to go out and start their Christmas shopping early to try and limit queues and allow better social distancing in the run-up to the day in December. Isn't there the risk that by delaying or stopping people going out and shopping, that you are essentially going to bottleneck it towards the end of the year?
Well, that's, again, a really important point, and this is why we were determined to make this the shortest possible firebreak. 2 weeks is the absolute minimum that can be operated if it's to be successful. Anything lengthier than that, you're right, Mike, would have pushed then retail to the position where there would have been tremendous demand and then therefore footfall on the high street and in shopping centres. We wish to avoid that. We support the Retail Consortium in calling on people to shop early, to shop in a way that's responsible, to be mindful about the pandemic. But that 2-week period enables retail then to have a lengthier period as we run through to Christmas. There is no option to do nothing. So the alternative would be perhaps to have a lengthier period of time of closures or restrictions, which would only then push pressure even closer to Christmas. And that in turn would have posed an even greater threat in terms of driving up transmission rates as we reach December the 25th, and we wish to avoid that. That's why we have opted for this responsible, short, sharp fire break right now. I must apologise, I did indeed offer Mike third place there. It actually should have been Adam Hale from PA. Apologies, Adam.
Won't take it personally, don't worry about it. Returning to a similar question just asked, your fire break has been criticised by some quarters for disproportionately affecting certain people, certain industries. People in those industries, like non-essential retail, contact services, like hairdressers, especially in areas where the levels of COVID are low, they are being disproportionately affected, aren't they? They're disproportionately taking a hit.
But the point, Adam, is that they will get the same support from this Welsh Government. They will get that support regardless of whether they are forced to close or close, and those businesses that are forced to close will be eligible for a generous package of support, the most generous package of support anywhere in the United Kingdom. And again, I'd stress that this is for just 2 weeks. Elsewhere, restrictions are being imposed for 4 weeks, for 6 weeks, and potentially longer if the tier system in England does not operate correctly and they have to revisit that entire scheme. Who knows how long businesses may end up suffering in England. Here in Wales, we are taking the responsible course of action, which is a short, sharp fire break.
Thank you. We hear what you're saying about wanting the Treasury to help you out with the job support scheme date, meaning that obviously people who do fall between the gaps and left without a wage at time for a week during difficult times. But do you accept that the consequences of that, considering it was your decision to bring in this lockdown at a time without first working something out with Sunak, the consequences fall on you? After all, your government has throughout this pandemic prided itself on working out the details of things before first making decisions.
Well, there are a number of important points to make here. First of all, we developed the 2-week fire break in conjunction with local authorities, with business groups, with trade unions, with all manner of stakeholders. We haven't had a 10-day standoff with any part of Wales over the measures that we've announced. We have brought businesses, local authorities, trades unions with us. And that's important because it demonstrates that the proposals that we have outlined are the right proposals. But it's absolutely essential that the UK government honours its commitment and makes sure that it delivers on its responsibility in supporting working people through the fire break. And the easiest and best way to do that would be to bring forward the job support scheme. We are happy to invest there or thereabouts £11 million to enhance the job retention scheme to the level of the job support scheme so that we can bring it forward. All that the UK government needs to do is to administer it. And in communications that we've had with the UK government, it's appeared throughout that there is no gap in terms of the time. All we are asking for is a simplification of the process so that businesses don't have to apply twice and so that working people get the best possible outcome. And I'll now move to Mark Smith, Wales Online.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. While large parts of Wales have been living under local restrictions for up to 6 weeks now, there are also several counties that have not been subject to any substantial measures for a long time. What's your message to business owners in places like Pembrokeshire and Powys that have been trading in a COVID-compliant manner in relatively low incidence areas that could now find themselves subject to closure? And could we see a situation where non-essential shops are able to open in some counties on or after November the 9th while remaining closed in other areas where infection rates are higher?
Well, it's our intention to move to a national scheme after November the 9th. And I would say to those businesses in those parts of Wales that have not yet been affected by local restrictions that the virus is catching up, that it's catching up and it will overwhelm the NHS across the whole of Wales if we do not take the action that we've outlined. And so I do have every sympathy for businesses who have been incredibly responsible in acting in a COVID-compliant way. But at some point this autumn, every part of Wales would struggle to deal with the rising cases of coronavirus. and our NHS across Wales, including in sparsely populated areas of Wales where capacity is not so great, would suffer terribly as a consequence. And so it's better to take a 2-week fire break than to wait until further in the autumn for those parts of Wales where incidence rates are not so high, for them only to suffer from a lengthier period of restrictions, particularly in the run-up to that vital festive period.
Thank you very much. And secondly, from both perhaps a health and economic perspective, what thought was given to perhaps narrowing the strict fire break lockdown rules so they only apply to the elderly population and those most at risk from the virus? Is there perhaps an argument to let everyone else in society continue without these restrictions for the benefit of businesses and people's mental well-being?
Well, of course, we've looked at all options, and I think what's really important to note here is that the technical advice group to Welsh Government have produced a comprehensive report concerning the fire break that looks at options, including those that you've just identified, and its conclusions are compelling, that unless we operate the fire break in the way that they recommended and which we will now be implementing, the NHS would not be able to cope with rising cases in the winter. And if you look at where cases of COVID are transmitted, it's often within domestic dwellings. The virus, in terms of its transmission, is blind to the age of people. It will transmit through households regardless of whether you are young or old. We have to introduce measures, therefore, that protect every person from the transmission of coronavirus in order to reset the pandemic in Wales. And that's why we have opted for this responsible, short, sharp fire break. I'll now move to Branwen Jones from the Daily Post.
Thank you, Minister. The reality TV show I'm a Celebrity is due to take place at Gyda'r Castle in North Wales. But we've heard local businesses are expressing concerns about whether it should go ahead, given they are having to shut down. What are your thoughts on this?
I have to be honest, Branwen. I've been rather busy of late, so I haven't been following the toils of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Clearly, I'm delighted that the series is being filmed in Wales, in North Wales, at Gyda'r Castle, which is a phenomenal location. If it can continue in a COVID-safe way, then clearly it has long-term benefits in terms of promoting North Wales. And I think the point there is that it has to be conducted in a COVID-safe way. And I know that the producers of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here are incredibly keen to demonstrate that they can produce a show of this nature during a pandemic in a responsible way. And, you know, it may well be that the television watching public just needs something like that right now because, as a number of journalists have identified, there is a well-being and mental health crisis at the moment, and we do need things that can unite people, and this sort of programme can often do that.
Thank you. And my second question, First Minister Mark Drakeford said any benefits from the fire break will not be known until after the 2-week period has finished. If the coronavirus figures are still rising or are still a concern after, will you look at further fire break national lockdowns, or would you rule them out?
Well, clearly we won't see the impact of the fire break until there is that lagged period beyond us, so it could take 2 weeks as you identify. If everybody acts in accordance with the regulations, then we will see a significant decrease in the R number. It could decrease from 1.4 down to 0.8. That would in turn buy us enough time and give us the headroom to get through to Christmas and the New Year. It's in everybody's interest, therefore, to comply with the regulations, to adhere to the rules during the 2-week fire break. But of course, we could not rule out the possibility of introducing another fire break in the New Year if over the Christmas period transmission rates increase dramatically. We're going to be taking advantage of the coming 2 weeks to develop what I've said already will be a national scheme, which we can introduce after November the 9th, which will hopefully suppress transmission rates through the autumn and through the winter. But I cannot rule out the possibility of a further fire break potentially in the new year. But what I'm determined to do is to make sure that businesses and that people have the greatest degree of certainty in their lives and the way that they operate, so that they know that they have a good period of time between any fire breaks to get the best out of the business opportunities that exist, and that they have as many freedoms as possible. And I'm now going to move finally to Andrew Nuttall at The Leader. Andrew, good to see you.
Minister, a message. Do you have a message for businesses sort of worried ahead of this fire break that they may be able to survive the 2 weeks. I know a lot are still feeling from the initial lockdown, and with trading not going ahead, they'll still have bills to pay and staff wages as well. So what's your message to those?
You're absolutely right, Andrew. We couldn't just rely on UK government support for workers in the form of the job retention scheme and the job support scheme, because there are other operating costs that businesses have to shoulder. And particularly during a 2-week fire break, they won't have any income, there will be no turnover, and therefore Welsh Government rightly and responsibly stepped forward with the £300 million Economic Resilience Fund and the third phase of it. So £300 million is going to be invested in businesses for 2 weeks. That's a huge sum of money, and it gives businesses an enormous amount of armour to be able to weather that 2-week period. And it also then buys businesses the best prospect of being able to get through to Christmas with a great degree of certainty about being open and operating. And I think that's what businesses have been calling for throughout this pandemic, a greater sense of certainty. And that is what this Welsh Government is going to be giving them.
Thank you. And then sort of on the flip side of that, a lot of people who will be on sort of higher incomes may not have as many worries as families that live on low incomes. They may too be struggling to pay bills and sort of keep their heads above water and keep their families fed. So what is your message to these people during the lockdown that may potentially have their bills cut, their income cut further? Or
Absolutely. Again, poverty rates in Wales is something that we're acutely aware of, and that's why we have the discretionary assistance fund operating for people who are hardest hit. I'd encourage people who fall into that bracket that you've identified, Andrew, to seek support through the discretionary assistance fund. But I'd say to all citizens, we're approaching Christmas. Now more than ever, we need to show solidarity and care for one another. This is going to be a tremendously difficult period, a dark winter, and we need to look out for one another, especially those who are most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.